Some stories begin with a wedding, others begin with a funeral, but this one begins with both endings happening inside the same heart. The day Emily Carter signed her divorce papers was the same day she buried every dream she had ever dared to believe in. 3 years of marriage, one devastating loss, and a man who walked away when she needed him most. Chicago in November carries a particular kind of cold. Not the crisp freshness of early autumn, nor the romantic white silence of December snow. November cold seeps into bones, into memories, into the spaces between heartbeats where grief still lives. Emily pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of her small apartment on the north side, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. She had learned in the 2 years since her divorce that disappearing was something everything did eventually. Dreams, marriages, children who never got the chance to take their first breath. She walked the familiar 6 blocks to the community center, where she worked as a counselor for families in crisis. The irony was never lost on her. A woman whose own family had crumbled, spending her days helping others hold theirs together. But perhaps that was exactly why she was good at it. She understood the weight of loss in a way that could not be taught in any university classroom. She had lived it. She was still living it. The community center occupied an old brick building that had once been a factory. Now its large windows let in grey morning light, and its high ceilings echoed with the voices of children in the after-school program. Emily loved this place. It had become her sanctuary, her purpose, her reason to get out of bed on mornings when the emptiness felt too heavy to carry. Today was supposed to be ordinary. A staff meeting at 9, 3 counseling sessions before lunch, paperwork in the afternoon, maybe a quiet dinner alone, a book, and an early sleep. Emily had become expert at filling her days with enough activity to keep the silence at bay. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick, moment by moment, until she could almost convince herself that she was whole again. But fate has a way of laughing at our carefully constructed plans, and Emily Carter was about to discover that the past never truly stays buried. It simply waits, patient and inevitable, for the moment when it can rise again and change everything. The morning passed without incident. Emily counseled a young mother struggling to balance work and childcare. She met with a teenager whose parents were going through a bitter separation. She ate a sandwich at her desk while reviewing case files. Normal, predictable, safe. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon when the door to her office opened without a knock. Emily looked up, ready to remind whoever it was about professional courtesy, but the words died on her lips when she saw Director Morrison's face. The older woman looked pale, her usual composure replaced by something that resembled barely controlled panic. "Director Morrison," Emily said, rising from her chair. "What is wrong? We need to talk." The director closed the door behind her and leaned against it as if she needed the support. "Emily, I have just received some very concerning news about our funding situation." Emily felt her stomach tighten. The community center operated primarily on grants and donations. They were always 1 fiscal quarter away from potential closure. Is it the Henderson Foundation grant? Did they decide not to renew? No. Director Morrison shook her head slowly. "No, this is something else entirely. Emily, have you heard of the Romano family?" The name meant nothing to Emily. She shook her head. They are one of the most powerful families in Chicago. Old money supposedly from construction and real estate, but everyone knows their real business operates in shadows. The director paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "They have offered to become our primary benefactor. A donation large enough to fund our operations for the next 10 years. That sounds like wonderful news." Emily did not understand the director's obvious distress. "Why do you seem so worried?" "Because of who is behind the offer." Director Morrison walked to the window, looking out at the grey afternoon sky. "The head of the Romano family specifically requested to meet with you, Emily. He asked for you by name." "Me? But I do not know anyone in that family." "Why would they want to meet with me?" Director Morrison turned to face her, and in her eyes Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. a mixture of fear and pity, and the kind of knowledge that changes everything. "Emily," the director said quietly, "the current head of the Romano family is a man named Daniel Romano, but that is not the name he was born with. Before he became Daniel Romano, before he inherited this empire through marriage and circumstance, he was someone else entirely." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Emily gripped the edge of her desk because her legs had stopped feeling reliable. "His birth name," Director Morrison continued, "was Daniel Carter, your ex-husband." The words did not make sense. They could not make sense. Daniel, her Daniel, the man she had married in a small church ceremony 6 years ago, the man who had held her hand through 18 hours of labor only to have it end in the worst possible way, the man who had slowly withdrawn into himself afterward, until there was nothing left between them but silence and pain, and eventually a stack of legal papers that Daniel was somehow connected to one of the most powerful crime families in Chicago. No. Emily heard her own voice, as if from a great distance. "That is not possible. Daniel worked in finance. He was an accountant. He was normal, ordinary, just a regular person who could not handle grief. People are rarely what they appear to be." Director Morrison's voice was gentle. "I do not know the details of how he became involved with the Romano family, but I have confirmed the information through multiple sources. Daniel Carter legally changed his name to Daniel Romano 3 months after your divorce was finalized. He married Isabella Romano, the only daughter of the previous family head, and when her father passed away last year, Daniel assumed control of the entire organization." Emily sat down heavily. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the man she had known, the quiet, somewhat distant accountant who preferred spreadsheets to conversation, with the image of a mafia boss. It was like trying to force 2 puzzle pieces together that clearly did not fit. "And he wants to meet with me. Why? I do not know. But Emily, I feel I should warn you. The Romano family is known for many things, and very few of them are legal. Whatever Daniel wants, you should be very careful. You do not have to take this meeting if you do not want to." Emily stared at her hands, at the place where her wedding ring used to sit, at the faint tan line that had long since faded. 2 years of building a new life, 2 years of convincing herself that the past was behind her. And now it was reaching out from the shadows, wearing the face of the man who had once promised to love her forever. "No," she said finally, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I will meet with him. I need to understand what is happening. I need to know why he became this person and what he wants. From me now." Director Morrison nodded slowly. "The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow evening. A car will come for you at 6. Emily, please be careful." "I will." But even as she said the words, Emily knew that careful had already ceased to be an option. The moment Daniel re-entered her life, everything changed, and she had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. That night, Emily could not sleep. She lay in her small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying memories she had spent 2 years trying to forget. The way Daniel used to laugh before the loss that stole the light from his eyes, the quiet mornings they shared over coffee, when conversation was unnecessary because their silence was comfortable. The nursery they had painted together, soft yellow walls and white furniture and dreams that never got the chance to become real. She had loved him. Despite everything that came after, despite the way he retreated into himself when she needed him most, despite the cold distance that grew between them until divorce seemed like the only option, she had loved him with everything she had, and part of her, the part she kept locked away in the deepest chamber of her heart, still did. But the Daniel she loved was an accountant, a quiet man who wore glasses and worried about tax codes, not a mafia boss, not someone who dealt in shadows and danger. How could one person become someone so completely different? Sleep finally came sometime after 3 in the morning, but it brought no rest. Emily dreamed of hospitals and empty nurseries and a man walking away into darkness, his face becoming someone else's with every step. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety and distraction. Emily went through the motions of her work, but her mind was elsewhere. At 5:30, she left the community center and walked home quickly, changing into something more appropriate for a meeting she could not begin to prepare for. She chose a simple dark dress, professional but not formal, armor for a battle she did not understand. At exactly 6 o'clock, a black car appeared outside her building. It was sleek and expensive, the kind of vehicle that looked out of place on her modest street. Emily watched from her window as a driver in a dark suit emerged and approached her door. "This is really happening," she whispered to herself, and then, before she could change her mind, she grabbed her coat and went downstairs. The driver said nothing as he opened the rear door for a "Hertite." Emily slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The door closed with a solid, expensive sound, and then they were moving through the Chicago evening, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. They drove north, into neighborhoods Emily rarely visited. The buildings grew larger, the spaces between them wider, until they were passing through gates into what could only be described as an estate. The house that emerged from the darkness was massive, a stone mansion that looked like it belonged in another century, another country. Lights glowed warmly from tall windows, and Emily could see the shapes of gardens even in the November gloom. The car stopped before wide stone steps. The driver opened her door. "Mr. Romano is expecting you," he said. These were the first words he had spoken. Emily climbed the steps on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a formal entryway of marble and dark wood. A woman in a simple black dress greeted her. "Miss Carter, please follow me." They walked through halls lined with art and antiques, past rooms Emily caught only glimpses of, until they reached a set of double doors at the back of the house. The woman knocked once, then opened them. The room beyond was a study, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk near tall windows. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the walls. And standing before those windows, silhouetted against the last light of day, was a figure Emily would have recognized anywhere. Even after 2 years, even after everything. Daniel. He turned at the sound of the door closing, and Emily felt her breath catch. He looked different. Harder somehow, his features more defined, his posture carrying an authority that had never been there before. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, and when his eyes met hers, she saw something in them that was both familiar and completely foreign. "Emily." His voice was the same. Deeper, perhaps, but the same voice that had whispered promises in the dark, that had spoken vows before friends and family, that had gone silent in the face of unbearable loss. "Thank you for coming." She did not know what she had expected. Anger, perhaps. Fear. But what she felt instead was a strange calmness, as if some part of her had always known this moment would come. "I almost did not recognize you," she said. "Daniel Carter, accountant. Now Daniel. Romano, head of a crime family. That is quite a transformation." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I suppose it is." "How?" She took a step closer, then stopped herself. "How did this happen? You were the most ordinary person I ever knew. You hated risk. You filed our taxes 3 months early every year because you could not stand the uncertainty of waiting." Daniel moved to a small bar near the fireplace, pouring 2 glasses of something amber. "People change, Emily. Grief changes them. After we lost the baby, after I lost you, I had nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, you become capable of things you never imagined." He offered her a glass. She took it, but did not drink. "You left me," she said, the old wound opening despite her best efforts to keep it closed. "When I needed you most, you withdrew. You became a stranger in our own home. And then you just walked away." "I know." He did not look away from her accusation. "I know what I did. I have had 2 years to live with it, to understand the full weight of that failure. I was drowning in my own grief, and instead of reaching for you, I let the current pull me under. By the time I surfaced, it was too late. You were gone, and I was someone else entirely. How did you even end up connected to this family?" Daniel gestured toward 2 chairs near the fire. Emily hesitated, then sat. He took the chair across from her. After the divorce, I was lost. I threw myself into work, took risks I never would have considered before. One of those risks involved investing money for a client I should have investigated more thoroughly. That client was Anthony Romano, the former head of this family. When I discovered who he really was, I should have run. Instead, I saw an opportunity, a chance to become someone powerful enough that nothing could ever hurt me again. And you married his daughter? Yes. Daniel's expression flickered with something Emily could not quite read. Isabella was kind. She understood. Damaged because she had her own. We built something together. Not love exactly, but partnership. Mutual understanding. She passed away 6 months ago. Complications from an illness she had fought for years. I am sorry. The words came automatically, but Emily meant them. Whatever Daniel had become, she knew what loss felt like. When Anthony died last year, the organization came to me. Isabella was too ill to take leadership, and she had no siblings. I was the only option. Daniel took a long drink from his glass. So now I am this. A man I never intended to become, running an empire I never asked for, with more power than I know what to do with. Emily let the silence stretch between them, the fire crackling softly, the weight of revelations settling into the space. Why am I here, Daniel? Why did you ask to meet with me? He set down his glass and leaned forward, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Because I have spent 2 years trying to forget you, and I have failed. Because every success, every achievement, every bit of power I have accumulated means nothing when I think about how I abandoned you when you needed me most. Because I want to make things right, even if I do not know how. You think funding my community center will make things right? No. Daniel shook his head. The donation is real, and it comes with no conditions. Your center does important work, and I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But that is not why I asked you. Here. Then why? Because I want you to know the truth, all of it. Who I am now, what I have done, and what I am trying to become. And then I want to ask you a question. What question? Daniel stood, moving to the window where the night had fully descended, the garden lights creating islands of illumination in the darkness. I want to ask you to give me a chance, not to reconcile, not to pretend the past did not happen, but to start something new, to see if the man I am now might be worthy of the woman you have become. Emily felt the world shift beneath her feet. This was not what she had expected. Not demands or threats or the cold business transaction she had braced herself for. This was something far more complicated, a door opening to a path she could not see the end of. You run a criminal organization, Daniel. Whatever feelings might still exist between us, that is not something I can ignore. I know. And I am not asking you to. He turned back to face her. I am asking you to. Let me show you who I really am. Not the man I was when we were married, and not the reputation that precedes me now. The actual person beneath all of that. The person who still remembers the sound of your laugh, who still thinks about the yellow nursery we never got to use, who still loves you even though he has no right to. The words hit Emily like physical blows. She set down her untouched drink and stood. I need time, she said. This is too much to process in one evening. Take all the time you need. Daniel's voice was gentle. I am not going anywhere. And Emily, whatever you decide, the donation to your center stands. That was never about leveraging your feelings. It was about doing something good with resources that came from less good places. Emily walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. The man I married would never have had the courage to say the things you just said. He would have hidden behind silence and distance and let me fill in the blanks myself. I told you. Daniel's voice carried across the room. People change. Sometimes they have to lose everything before they understand what matters. Emily left without another word. But as the black car carried her back through the Chicago night, she knew that everything had changed. The past she thought she had buried was very much alive, and the future, which had seemed so predictable just 24 hours ago, had become a landscape of impossible possibilities. She did not know what she would decide. She did not know if she could ever trust Daniel again, or if the man he had become was someone she could love. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer the same woman who had signed those divorce papers 2 years ago. She had rebuilt herself from broken pieces, and whatever came next, she would face it with the strength she had earned through surviving the worst. The story of Emily Carter was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Check if you are already. Subscribe to this channel. If you are not, take a moment to subscribe now, because stories like this one, stories of impossible love and second chances, and the courage to face the past, are exactly what we create here. You will not want to miss what happens next. 3 weeks passed after that first meeting. 3 weeks of Emily going through her daily routines while carrying a secret that changed the color of everything. She had told no one about Daniel, not her colleagues at the community center, not her sister who called every Sunday, not the therapist she saw twice a month to maintain the emotional equilibrium she had fought so hard to achieve. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? The donation arrived exactly as Daniel had promised, an anonymous gift to the community center large enough to secure their operations for years. Director Morrison had been suspicious but practical. Whatever the source, the money would help families in need. Emily kept her knowledge to herself, watching as new programs were announced and long-delayed repairs finally scheduled, knowing that the man behind it all was someone no one would believe if she told them. Daniel did not contact her directly. No calls, no messages, no mysterious cars appearing outside her apartment. He was giving her the space she had asked for, and Emily found herself both grateful and oddly disappointed. She caught herself checking her phone more often than usual, jumping slightly at unexpected sounds, looking for a face she was not supposed to want to see in crowds. On the 22nd day, she made a decision. She would see him again. Not because she had answers, but because she had questions. Too many questions to ignore. She found his number on a card that had been tucked into her coat pocket that first night, probably by the driver she had barely registered. The conversation was brief. He suggested dinner at a restaurant. She counter-suggested a walk in a public park. They compromised on coffee at a small cafe in a neighborhood where neither of them was likely to be recognized. Daniel was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with a clear view of both exits. He stood when he saw her, and Emily noticed how the simple gesture carried an air of old-world courtesy that seemed simultaneously natural and practiced. "You came." He pulled out her chair. "I have questions." I expected nothing less. They ordered coffee and sat in the particular silence of two people who once knew each other completely and now find themselves strangers. Emily studied his face, looking for traces of the man she had married. They were there, beneath the surface confidence and the sharper edges. The same eyes that had looked at her across a crowded room 5 years ago and somehow known. "Tell me about your life now," she said. "Not the organization, your actual daily existence." Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. He had ordered it black, which surprised her. The Daniel she remembered preferred his coffee sweet enough to be almost undrinkable. "I wake early," he began. "There are always calls to take, decisions to make. The business side of things is more complex than most people imagine. Construction projects, real estate development, legitimate investments. Only about 20% of our operations exist in gray areas, and I am working to reduce even that." Gray areas. Emily raised an eyebrow. "I will not pretend to be something I am not." Daniel's voice was steady. "The organization I inherited has been involved in activities I do not condone. Protection services that crossed into intimidation, loan operations with terms no ethical bank would offer, political influence purchased rather than earned. I have spent the last year trying to transform us into something legitimate. It is slow work. Some of my associates resist the changes, and the ones who resist, they are given choices. They can adapt or they can leave. No one is forced to stay, and no one is harmed for wanting out. Whatever you might have heard about how these families operate, I am trying to do things differently." Emily sipped her coffee, considering his words. "Why should I believe you? You should not based on words alone. Daniel set down his cup and met her eyes directly. That is why I want to show you. Let me take you to some of our projects, the affordable housing development we are building on the south side, the scholarships we fund for first-generation college students, the addiction recovery center we opened last year. See for yourself what we are doing with the resources we have. You are trying to buy redemption. No. Daniel shook his head slowly. There is no buying redemption. I know that. What I am trying to do is use what I have to create something good, to balance the scales, even if they can never be fully balanced. Is that so different from what you do at the community center? Taking broken situations and trying to help them heal. The comparison struck Emily as both accurate and deeply uncomfortable. She had spent 2 years telling herself that Daniel was the one who failed, the one who could not handle grief, the one who ran away. But sitting across from him now, seeing the weight of responsibility he carried, the genuine attempt at transformation, she wondered if the story was more complicated than she had allowed herself to believe. "What happened to you after the divorce?" she asked. The real story, not the business summary. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Outside the cafe window, people walked past in the late autumn afternoon, bundled against the cold, absorbed in their own lives and problems. "I fell apart," he said finally. "For about 3 months, I barely functioned. Went to work, came home, stared at walls, lost 15 pounds because eating seemed pointless. And then one day, I was sitting in my apartment with a bottle of something strong, and I realized I had a choice. I could continue, dissolving into nothing, or I could become someone entirely different, someone strong enough to survive. So you chose the Mafia. I chose power." Daniel's voice carried no defensive edge. At the time, I did not think about what that meant in larger terms. I just knew that I had been helpless when it mattered most. Helpless to save our child, helpless to save our marriage, helpless to save myself from my own grief. I never wanted to feel that helpless again. Emily felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but understanding, a recognition that grief took people to strange and desperate places, that survival sometimes wore faces no one would recognize. "I blamed you," she said quietly. "For years I blamed you for not being there when I needed you, for leaving me to grieve alone, for giving up on us without a fight. I know. And you were right to blame me. I did all those things, but I never asked what you were going through." Emily heard her own voice crack slightly. "I was so consumed with my own pain that I never really tried to understand yours. Maybe if I had, things would have been different, or maybe they would have been exactly the same." Daniel reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "We were both drowning, Emily. 2 people drowning cannot save each other. All they can do is survive separately and hope they find their way back to shore. And now, I am standing on solid ground for the first time in years, and I see you, standing on your own shore, and I wonder if there might be a bridge somewhere between us." Emily looked at his hand, so close to hers on the scarred wooden table. She remembered how those hands had held hers during labor, had trembled while signing divorce papers, had probably done things since then that she did not want to imagine. "Show me," she said. "Show me these projects. Show me who you are now." Daniel's face transformed with something that looked dangerously like hope. "When? Tomorrow. Before. I can change my mind." They finished their coffee in a different kind of silence, not the uncomfortable tension of strangers, but the charged quiet of 2 people standing at the edge of something neither fully understands. When they parted outside the cafe, Daniel did not try to kiss her or even hug her. He simply looked at her with those familiar eyes in that unfamiliar face and said, "Thank you for giving me a chance." Emily walked home through the cold November streets, her mind full of questions she could not answer. She was walking into something dangerous, not the physical danger of criminals and power struggles, though that existed too, something more personal. The danger of opening a door she had sealed shut, of risking a heart she had only recently learned to protect. But she had not rebuilt her life by playing it safe. She had rebuilt it by facing hard truths and making difficult choices. And whatever Daniel had become, whatever the organization he led represented, she could not make informed decisions without information. Tomorrow she would see for herself, and then, maybe then, she would know what to do next. The morning arrived grey and cold, winter making its first serious threats against autumn. Emily dressed practically in warm layers and sensible shoes, unsure what the day would involve. At exactly 9 o'clock, a car appeared outside her building. Not the sleek black vehicle from before, but something more modest, a dark sedan that would not draw attention. Daniel was in the back seat. He smiled when she climbed in, and Emily noticed he was dressed casually as well, jeans and a sweater that reminded her almost painfully of the man he used to be. "Thank you for coming. I said I would." The first stop was on the south side of Chicago, an area Emily knew only from news reports about crime rates and economic depression. But what she saw when they arrived was not decay. It was construction. Dozens of workers in hard hats moved around a skeleton, of buildings rising from what must have recently been vacant lots. Affordable housing, Daniel explained as they walked through the site, hard hats of their own perched awkwardly on their heads. 300 units when it is finished. Mixed income, so we do not just concentrate poverty in one place. Ground floor retail to bring jobs to the neighborhood. A community center not unlike your own. Emily watched the workers, listened to the foreman calling instructions, felt the energy of something, being built rather than torn down. "This is real," she said half to herself, "as real as anything." Daniel led her to a trailer that served as a site office, where plans were spread across tables and project timelines covered the walls. "We will not make our money back for decades, if ever. But that is not the point. The point is that 300 families will have safe, affordable homes in a neighborhood that has not seen investment in generations." They visited a school next, a charter academy, funded by the Romano Family Foundation, where children in neat uniforms greeted them with curious eyes. Emily watched Daniel interact with the students, saw how his face softened, how he crouched down to speak to them at eye level, how he remembered names from previous visits. "Education is the only reliable path out of poverty," he said as they left. "I did not have to worry about that growing up. My parents were comfortable. I had every advantage, but most kids do not. If I can use my resources to give even a few of them better chances, then maybe all of this will have meant something." The Addiction Recovery Center was the last stop. It occupied a renovated warehouse in a quiet industrial area, and inside, Emily found a facility that rivaled any private treatment center she had ever seen. Comfortable rooms, professional staff, and patients who looked at Daniel not with fear, but with genuine gratitude. "Recovery takes time," Daniel explained. "Most programs give people 30 days and send them back to the same circumstances that led to their addiction. We offer 6 months minimum, plus job training, transitional housing, and ongoing support. Our success rate is 3 times the national average." "How do you fund all this?" "Legitimate investments mostly. Real estate, construction, a few tech startups that have done well. I told you I am working to move the organization entirely into legal operations. These programs are part of that. They give my people something meaningful to do, and they generate goodwill that helps smooth other business dealings." Emily stood in the center of the recovery center's common room, watching patients play cards and talk quietly, and felt her certainties shifting beneath her feet. This was not what she had expected. None of this was what she had expected. "Why did you want me to see this?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to know that I am not a monster." Daniel's voice was low, meant only for her. "Whatever else I may be, whatever necessary compromises I have made, I'm trying to do good in the world. I'm trying to be someone worth loving." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "Daniel, I do not know what this is between us. I do not know if there can be anything between us. You are not the man I married, and I am not the woman you left, I know, but I see what you are doing here, and I respect it. Whatever else I feel, I respect this. That is more than I hoped for." Daniel smiled, and for just a moment, he looked like the young accountant who had nervously asked for her number at a friend's party 5 years ago. "Can we have dinner?" Not to pressure you, not to make any decisions. Just two people sharing a meal and seeing if they still know how to talk to each other. Emily hesitated. Every sensible instinct told her to say no, to protect herself, to keep the walls firmly in place. But there was another voice, quieter but insistent, that reminded her how lonely she had been, how the life she had rebuilt, safe and predictable, was also empty of the kind of connection she had once known. "Dinner," she said finally. "But I'd choose the restaurant. Deal." They had dinner that night at a small Italian place Emily loved, far from the wealthy neighborhoods where Daniel now belonged. They talked about everything and nothing, avoiding the heavy topics by unspoken agreement, simply rediscovering the rhythms of conversation that had once come so naturally. Daniel told stories about his legitimate business dealings, the colorful characters he encountered, the challenges of transformation. Emily shared tales from the community center, the families she helped, the small victories that made the work worthwhile. For a few hours, they were just two people getting to know each other again. Not ex-spouses with painful history, not a counselor and a crime boss, just Emily and Daniel, sharing pasta and red wine, and the careful beginnings of something neither was ready to name. When the evening ended, Daniel walked her to her door but made no move to come in. "Thank you for today," he said, "for keeping an open mind. Thank you for showing me." Emily paused with her keys in her hand. "I do not know where this goes, Daniel. I am not sure I can ever fully trust you again knowing what you have become. I am not asking you to trust me. Not yet. I am asking you to watch me. To let me prove through actions what words can never prove. And if, after time, you decide that I have earned even a small piece of your trust, that will be enough. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emily." She watched him walk back to his car, watched the taillights disappear into the night. Then she went inside and sat in her dark apartment for a long time, trying to understand what she was feeling. The past was not what she had thought it was. The present was full of impossible complications. And the future, for the first time in 2 years, held something other than carefully managed. Solitude. Winter arrived with a vengeance in the weeks that followed. Chicago disappeared under heavy snow, the city transformed into a landscape of white streets and breath that froze before it faded. Emily's life had transformed too, though less visibly. She and Daniel fell into a pattern, not quite dating, not quite friends, but something in between that had no easy name. They met once or twice a week, always in public places, always with the understanding that this was exploration rather than commitment. Sometimes they had dinner. Sometimes they walked through museums or sat in coffee shops or watched the city from the observation deck of tall buildings. They talked about their pasts, their presents, their uncertain hopes for the future. And slowly Emily began to see the man Daniel had become. He was still recognizable, still carried echoes of the quiet accountant she had married. But there was a core of steel in him now that had not existed before. A willingness to make hard decisions, to shoulder responsibilities that would crush lesser people, to live with compromises that had no clean answers. He was more complex than the man she had known, and in some ways more admirable. The transformation that had led him to power had also led him to purpose. He was using his position to make genuine change, and that mattered. But Emily also saw the shadows. Daniel carried a weight that never fully lifted, visible in the way he sometimes stared into middle distance, in the security personnel who were never far away, in the conversations cut short by encrypted phone calls he stepped away to take. His world was dangerous in ways she could only glimpse. People depended on him, but people also wanted to harm him. Every day he walked a line between power and vulnerability. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked him one evening as they sat in a quiet corner of a jazz club, the music wrapping around them like warm smoke. "Taking over the family, becoming this person?" Daniel considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I regret the circumstances that made it possible. Isabella's illness, Anthony's death, my own desperate need to become something stronger than I was. But the position itself, No. I have done more good in 2 years than I could have in a lifetime as an accountant. I have the power to change lives, to build things that matter. That is not something to regret. Even knowing what you have to do to maintain that power. Even knowing. Daniel's eyes met hers in the dim light. I do not pretend to be innocent, Emily. Decisions I have made have had consequences for people who probably did not deserve them. But I try to minimize harm. I try to use force only when necessary and never cruelly. I am building something that could outlast me, something legitimately good. If the cost of that is my own moral purity, I am willing to pay it. I do not know if I could live like that. Emily traced the rim of her glass. Always calculating consequences, always weighing good against less bad. You already do, you just do it on a smaller scale. Every time you advise a family to stay together or separate, you are making calculations about likely outcomes. Every time you prioritize one case over another because resources are limited. The scale is different, but the fundamental challenge is the same. It was true, and Emily had no easy response. She had always thought of her work as fundamentally good, but Daniel was right. That it involved difficult choices. She could not help everyone. She had to decide who received her attention and who did not. The consequences of those decisions might be less dramatic than his, but they were no less real. I want to show you something, Daniel said, changing the subject in a way that felt deliberate. Something I have never shown anyone else. What is it? A place. Somewhere I go when I need to remember who I really am. They left the jazz club and drove through snowy streets to a neighborhood Emily did not recognize. The car stopped in front of a modest house, the kind of brick two-story common throughout Chicago, unremarkable in every way. I bought this house 3 months ago, Daniel explained as they walked up the freshly shoveled path. Anonymously through several shell companies. No one in my organization knows about it. Why? Daniel unlocked the door and led her into a living room that was warm and simply furnished. A comfortable couch, a reading chair, bookshelves, filled with actual books. No display of wealth, no statement of power. Just a room that felt like home. Because sometimes I need to be just Daniel. Not Romano, not the boss, not the man who controls an empire. Just a person who reads and thinks and remembers who he used to be before everything changed. Emily walked through the house slowly, taking in the details. A kitchen with herbs growing on the windowsill, a study with a desk and a computer. Upstairs, a bedroom that looked slept in, and a bathroom with ordinary toiletries, and at the end of the hall a door that was closed. What is in there? Daniel's face changed. Something painful moved behind his eyes. Something I need you to see. If we are going to have any chance at all, you need to understand this part of me. He opened the door and Emily felt her breath stop. It was a nursery. Not the yellow nursery they had painted together, not exactly, but similar. A crib with soft blankets, a changing table, a rocking chair by the window, and on every surface photographs. Emily recognized them. They were copies of the ultrasound images, the preparations they had made, the joy that had preceded the loss. I could not let go, Daniel said quietly, standing in the doorway. After everything, after the divorce and the transformation and all of it, I could not let go of what we almost had. I know it might seem unhealthy. Maybe it is. But coming here, sitting in this room, it helps me remember why I wanted to become strong in the first place. Not for power itself, but so I would never feel that helpless again. Emily stood in the middle of the nursery, tears streaming down her face. She had tried so hard to move forward, to let go of the grief, to build a life that did not revolve around loss. But seeing this room, knowing that Daniel had carried the same weight all this time, broke something open inside her. Daniel, she whispered. He was beside her then, and when he put his arms around her, she did not pull away. They stood together in that small room filled with memories of what would never be, holding each other the way they should have held each other years ago. Two people who had been broken by the same tragedy, finally allowing themselves to grieve together. I am sorry, Emily said into his shoulder. I'm so sorry I did not understand how much you were hurting. I am sorry I could not show you. I'm sorry I ran away instead of letting you help me." They stayed like that for a long time, in the house that no one knew about, in the room that held their shared loss. And when they finally separated, something had changed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of healing. The first tender shoots of connection growing in ground that had been frozen for too long. This is the moment, right here, that will stay with me forever. The moment when I realized that some wounds can only heal when they are shared. If this story is touching your heart, leave a comment right now saying, "I believe in second chances." Let me know that you understand what it means to find hope after loss. They talked through the night in that secret house, really talked in ways they never had during their marriage. About the baby they lost, about their individual grief, about the mistakes they had both made. Daniel told her about the dark months after the divorce, when he had considered ending everything until a chance encounter with Anthony Romano had given him something to live for. Emily told him about the slower healing she had done, the therapy and the work and the gradual rebuilding of a self that could function without him. By the time dawn lightened the windows, something fundamental had shifted. Emily looked at this man she had married and divorced and thought she knew, and she saw him clearly for the first time. Not a villain, not a hero, just a human being who had been through something terrible and had found an unusual way to survive. "What happens now?" she asked. "Whatever you want to happen." Daniel's voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. "I will not pressure you, I will not demand anything, but I want you to know that I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I was too broken to show it. And if there is any chance at all that we can build something together, something new that honors what we lost, I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." Emily took his hand, the hand of a man who controlled an empire built in shadows, the hand that had trembled while signing divorce papers, the hand that now reached for her with a vulnerability that no amount of power could protect. "I am not ready to say I love you," she said carefully. "Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. But I am willing to try, to see if we can find our way back to each other or forward to something new. I am willing to take that risk." Daniel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "That is all I ask." Spring came to Chicago like a slow awakening, snow melting into muddy puddles, then drying into the first hints of green. Emily watched the transformation from her office window at the community center, thinking about all the ways her own life had transformed over the winter months. She and Daniel were together now, though what that meant exactly was still being defined. They saw each other regularly, sometimes at his estate, sometimes at her apartment, often at the secret house that had become their private sanctuary. They were learning each other again, discovering who they had become, and whether those new selves could fit together. It was complicated. Emily had not told anyone the full truth about Daniel. Her colleagues at the community center knew she was seeing someone, but they did not know that someone was one of the most powerful men in Chicago's underground economy. Her sister suspected something was being hidden, but Emily deflected with vague explanations about privacy and taking things slow. She was not ashamed of Daniel, but she was not ready for the conversations his identity would require. Daniel, for his part, was working to accelerate the transformation of his organization. He had set a goal of moving entirely to legitimate operations within 3 years, and he was on track to meet it. The shadier elements of the family business were being systematically dismantled, their former participants offered buyouts or positions in legal enterprises. Not everyone was happy about the changes, but Daniel's authority was absolute, and opposition remained underground. It was during one of these transformation meetings that danger finally found them. Emily was at the estate that evening, reading in Daniel's study while he met with his senior advisors in the room next door. She had become familiar with these evenings, the murmur of serious voices, the occasional raised tone quickly lowered. She did not ask for details about what was discussed. There were parts of Daniel's life she needed to remain ignorant of, both for her own protection and her own conscience. The explosion came without warning. One moment Emily was turning a page, the next she was on the floor, ears ringing, dust and debris falling around her. The window behind her had shattered, and through the chaos she could see flames somewhere in the garden. Emily. Daniel was there, pulling her to her feet, his face cut and bleeding from flying glass. We have to go. Now. What happened? Later. Move. They ran through the house, which had transformed into a scene from a nightmare. Security personnel were everywhere, shouting into radios, weapons drawn. Emily caught glimpses of other people being evacuated, heard sirens in the distance. Daniel's hand gripped hers tightly, guiding her through corridors she had never seen, downstairs into a basement area, through a door that required multiple codes to open. The room beyond was a bunker, clearly designed for exactly this kind of emergency. Reinforced walls, communication, equipment, supplies. Several of Daniel's closest people were already there, including his head of security, a woman named Karen whose competence Emily had learned to respect. "Report," Daniel said, his voice transformed into something Emily barely recognized. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold authority. "Car explosive in the garden," Karen responded. "Detonated remotely. 2 of our people were near the vehicle. They did not survive." Emily felt her stomach lurch. 2 people dead. Just like that. Because someone wanted to send Daniel a message, or worse. Do we know who? Working on it. Karen glanced at Emily briefly, then back to Daniel. "But we have a suspected leak. Someone inside told them exactly when and where to strike." The next hours blurred together for Emily. She sat in the corner of the bunker, watching as Daniel managed the crisis with a competence that was almost frightening. He made decisions quickly, issued orders that were immediately followed, maintained absolute control even as the situation remained dangerous. This was the part of him she had not seen before, the part that had allowed him to rise from grieving accountant to head of a criminal empire. Around midnight, Karen approached her with a cup of coffee. "You should get some sleep if you can. This might take a while. How can anyone sleep after something like this?" Karen sat down beside her, her expression sympathetic despite its professional composure. "You learn to, eventually. The boss has enemies. That is the nature of power. What matters is that he protects what is his, and you are clearly included in that category. 2 people died tonight." "Yes." Karen's voice was matter-of-fact. "And if the boss had been in that garden instead of in his meeting, it would have been more. The people who did this wanted to cut off the head. They failed." Emily looked across the room at Daniel, who was still deep in strategic discussions. She had known, intellectually, that his world was dangerous. But knowledge and experience were different things. Tonight she had felt the reality of what it meant to be connected to a man like him. "He is a good man," Karen said quietly. "Better than most people in his position would be. The transformation he is leading, the legitimate future he is building, that is not just strategy. He believes in it. He wants to be someone worthy of the name his children might carry someday." Emily turned to look at her. "You know about us. I know about most things that matter to the organization, and you matter to him more than anything has in a long time. Do not underestimate what that means." It was nearly dawn when Daniel finally came to her. His face was still marked by cuts, though someone had cleaned and bandaged the worst of them. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "We found the leak," he said, sitting down heavily beside her. "One of my financial managers was being blackmailed. His family was threatened. He gave them the information about my schedule. What will happen to him?" Daniel was silent for a moment. In the old days, under Anthony, he would have been killed. His family too, probably, to send a message. But that is not who I am trying to be. His family will be relocated and protected. He will face consequences, but nothing permanent. And the people who threatened him, who planted that explosive, who killed my men tonight, they will be found. They will face justice. Whose justice? Mine. Daniel met her eyes. Directly. "I will not lie to you, Emily. The world I live in does not operate by the rules you are used to. The people who did this cannot simply be handed to the police. They would be released, and they would try again. The only way to ensure safety is to eliminate the threat." "You mean kill them?" I mean remove their ability to ever harm me or mine again." Daniel's voice held no apology. "I understand if this is too much. If this night has shown you that you cannot be part of my world, but I want you to understand my reasoning, even if you cannot accept it." Emily thought about the explosion, the chaos, the bodies of the 2 security personnel who had died simply for being in the wrong place. She thought about what it would feel like to live with this threat constantly, to know that enemies were always circling, waiting for an opportunity. "I do not know if I can accept it," she said honestly. "But I am not running away. Not tonight. Not without understanding more. That is all I can ask." They sat together in the bunker as the sun rose somewhere beyond the reinforced walls. Emily leaned against Daniel's shoulder, feeling the tension in his body, the weight of responsibility he carried. This was his reality. The power and the danger, the impossible choices, the constant vigilance. And somehow, despite everything, he was still trying to be better than his circumstances demanded. She did not know if she could live in this world permanently. She did not know if love was strong, enough to bridge the gap between her life and his, but she knew that walking away now when he needed support most would be a betrayal of everything they had rebuilt. For better or worse, she was in this, and she would see it through wherever it led. The months that followed were a strange mixture of tension and tenderness. Daniel's enemies were systematically dealt with, though Emily deliberately did not ask for details. The estate was rebuilt, security was increased, and the organization's transformation accelerated as Daniel pushed to reach legitimate status faster, driven by a desire to leave the danger behind. Emily moved between 2 worlds. Her work at the community center continued, helping families navigate crises that seemed almost quaint compared to what she knew about Daniel's life. And she spent increasingly more time in his world, learning its rhythms, getting to know the people who made up his inner circle, understanding the complexities of leading an organization through fundamental change. She also got to know Daniel in ways their marriage had never allowed. The grief that had driven them apart now became a bridge between them. They talked about the child they had lost, not with the painful silence of before, but with the bittersweet acceptance of people who have processed tragedy and emerged on the other side. They visited the secret house regularly, sitting in the nursery that Daniel had created, honoring the memory of what might have been while acknowledging that their futures could not be defined by loss alone. "I want to start a foundation," Emily said one evening as they sat on the porch of the secret house, watching summer fireflies dance in the warm air. A real one, not just a tax shelter, something focused on families who have experienced pregnancy loss and infant death. Support groups, counseling, practical assistance. There is so much stigma around these losses, so much isolation. "Tell me more." Daniel listened as Emily described her vision, asking thoughtful questions, offering suggestions from his experience with the other charitable programs the organization ran. By the end of the evening, they had sketched out a plan, and Daniel had committed the initial funding. "We will name it after the baby," Emily said quietly, "even though we never chose a name. Then we will choose one now." Daniel took her hand. Together, they settled on Hope, the Hope Foundation, dedicated to supporting families through the darkness of loss and into the possibility of future light. It was not the child they had wanted, but it was something. A way of creating meaning from tragedy, of ensuring that their loss might help others heal. As summer turned to autumn, Emily realized that she had stopped thinking of Daniel's world as separate from her own. The two had merged, complicated and imperfect, but undeniably real. She attended functions with him now, met openly with his associates, accepted a role in the organization's charitable activities that gave her influence and purpose. Not everyone was happy about her presence. Some of Daniel's older associates viewed her as an outsider, a distraction, a weakness. They remembered the harder times under Anthony Romano and resented the changes Daniel was implementing, but they kept their objections quiet for the most part. Daniel's authority was not to be questioned. The exception was a man named Marcus Reeves, who had been Anthony's closest advisor and now led the faction most resistant to transformation. He was careful never to openly challenge Daniel, but Emily caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her uncomfortable. He had built his career in the shadows, and Daniel's push toward legitimacy threatened everything he valued. "Be careful around him," Daniel warned when Emily mentioned her unease. "Marcus is valuable to certain aspects of our business, but his loyalty is to the old ways, not to me personally. I am managing him, but he is not someone to underestimate. You could remove him, not without evidence of betrayal, and he is smart enough not to give me that." Emily filed the warning away, adding it to the growing store of knowledge about this world she had entered. She understood now why Daniel maintained such tight security, why trust was measured in careful increments, why power required constant vigilance. The empire he had inherited was built on foundations of fear and self-interest, and transforming it into something better was like trying to renovate a house while still living in it. But progress was being made. The legitimate businesses were thriving, the charitable programs were expanding, and more of the organization's activities could withstand public scrutiny. Daniel's 3-year goal was within reach, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where his power came from creation rather than destruction. That future nearly ended on a cold November night, exactly 1 year after their first meeting. Emily was at her apartment that evening catching up on work. Daniel was at the estate, hosting a meeting of his senior leadership to finalize the next phase of their legitimate transition. They had planned to see each other the following day, to mark the anniversary with dinner at the restaurant, where they had their first meal together after his revelation. The call came at 11 o'clock, not from Daniel, but from Karen. "Emily." Karen's voice was tight with barely controlled urgency. "You need to come to the estate now. What happened?" "Marcus Reeves made his move. He has been working with outside interests, people who want to stop the transformation. They have the estate surrounded. Daniel is holding them off, but the situation is bad." "How bad?" "Bad enough that he asked me to call you, to tell you what might happen, and to tell you something else." "What?" "He said to tell you he loves you, and that whatever happens, the last year with you was the best of his life." Emily was in a car within minutes, driving faster than was safe through dark streets. Her mind was a chaos of fear and desperate hope. She could not lose him. Not now, not after everything they had survived together, not when they were so close to the future they had worked toward. The estate was indeed surrounded when she arrived, police and emergency vehicles blocking every approach. Emily pushed through the chaos, identified herself to the officers in charge, and was eventually allowed past the outer perimeter to where Karen was coordinating the response. "What is the situation?" "Marcus and about 30 men have control of the main house. They have hostages, including several of Daniel's most trusted people. They are demanding that Daniel sign over control of the organization before they will release anyone." "And Daniel?" "He escaped the initial takeover with a small team. They are somewhere on the grounds, probably in one of the secondary buildings. He has been in communication, trying to negotiate, but Marcus is not interested in compromise. What are the police doing?" "Preparing for the possibility that negotiation fails." Karen's face was grim. "If Marcus starts harming hostages, they will breach, and if that happens, a lot of people might die." Emily stood in the cold night air, watching the lights of the estate where her future had almost taken shape. Inside those walls, the man she loved was fighting for his life and the lives of people who depended on him. And there was nothing she could do but wait. Or was there? "Karen," Emily said slowly, "does Marcus know about me? About my relationship with Daniel?" "Of course. Everyone knows." "Then maybe I can help. Maybe I can give him something he wants more than signatures on paper." "You are not suggesting what I think you are suggesting. I am suggesting that I offer myself as a hostage in exchange for the others. Daniel will not sign over control of his organization. We both know that. But if Marcus has me, he has leverage over Daniel that goes beyond business." "Emily, that is insane. Daniel would never agree to it. Then we will not tell him until it is done." Emily met Karen's eyes with a determination that surprised even herself. Daniel has spent a year trying to protect me from his world. Now it is my turn to protect him. Let me do this." The negotiation was brief. Marcus, it turned out, had been hoping for exactly this opportunity, a chance to humiliate Daniel by threatening the woman he loved, to break his resolve in a way that mere business pressure never could. Emily walked into the main house with her hands raised, her heart pounding, her mind focused on the single goal of buying time. The hostages were released one by one as Emily moved deeper into the building. By the time she reached the main hall where Marcus waited, most of Daniel's people were free, streaming out to safety. Only a handful of Marcus's core supporters remained, gathered around their leader like wolves scenting blood. "The woman who rebuilt Daniel Romano," Marcus said as Emily was brought before him. "I have to admit I did not understand the attraction at first, but now, seeing you here, offering yourself to save others, I begin to see it. You have courage." "And you have miscalculated," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Daniel will not give you what you want just because you threaten me. He knows I would rather die than see his work destroyed." "Perhaps." Marcus smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "But we will see how strong his resolve is when he has to watch you suffer." The hours that followed were the worst of Emily's life. Not because Marcus harmed her physically, though the threat hung constantly in the air, but because she could do nothing but wait, knowing that Daniel was out there somewhere, knowing that he was being forced to make impossible choices, knowing that their future together hung by a thread. Dawn was breaking when the breach finally came, not from the police but from Daniel himself, leading a team that had been quietly positioning themselves throughout the night. The assault was swift, professional, and overwhelming. Within minutes, Marcus and his remaining loyalists were subdued, and Emily found herself in Daniel's arms, both of them trembling with relief and exhaustion. "What were you thinking?" Daniel demanded, his voice cracking. "You could have been killed." "I was thinking that I love you," Emily replied, "and that sometimes love means taking risks." They stood there in the ruined elegance of the main hall, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and its defeat, holding each other as if the world might tear them apart if they let go. Outside, the sun was rising on a new day, and inside, a new chapter was beginning. The aftermath of Marcus Reeves's attempted takeover changed everything. Daniel's organization emerged from the crisis stronger than before, united by the shared experience of surviving betrayal. The fence-sitters, who had quietly supported the old ways, suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of history. The transformation that Daniel had been pursuing accelerated dramatically as remaining resistance melted away. Within 6 months, the last of the questionable operations were shut down or sold off. The Romano family, as it was still called for historical reasons, became exactly what Daniel had envisioned from the beginning: a legitimate business empire built on construction, real estate, technology, and philanthropy. The shadows receded, replaced by the ordinary challenges of running large enterprises in the modern world. Emily's role in the events of that November night became legendary within the organization. She had offered herself as a hostage to save others, had demonstrated courage that matched Daniel's own. Whatever reservations anyone had held about her place in their world evaporated. She was one of them now, not by marriage or proximity, but by her own actions. The Hope Foundation launched that spring, funded by Romano family resources, but operated independently under Emily's direction. It grew quickly, filling a need that Emily had recognized from her own experience. Support groups formed in cities across the country. Counseling services reached families who had nowhere else to turn. Research grants advanced medical understanding of pregnancy loss. What had begun as a personal act of healing became a movement. On a perfect June evening, 1 year after the Foundation's launch, and nearly 3 years after Emily and Daniel's first meeting as changed people, they stood together in the garden of the secret house. It had been expanded now, the modest property transformed into something more fitting for the life they had built together, while remaining the private sanctuary it had always been. "I have something to ask you," Daniel said, his voice carrying the same nervous energy Emily remembered from the night he had first asked for her phone number, a lifetime ago. "Is this what—" "I think it is. That depends on what you think it is." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Emily, when I lost you the first time, I became someone else because I could not survive as the person I had been. When I found you again, I became someone better because you showed me what I was capable of. I am not the man you married, and you are not the woman I left. But maybe that is the point. Maybe we had to become different people to finally get it right." He opened the box, revealing a ring that Emily recognized. It was her original engagement ring, the modest diamond they had chosen together when they were young and uncertain and full of naive hope. "I kept it," Daniel admitted. "I told myself it was because I could not bear to sell it, but I think some part of me always knew this day might come. Emily Carter, will you marry me again? Will you help me build a life that honors who we have become and who we lost and all the possibilities we have yet to discover?" Emily looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the garden where fireflies were beginning their nightly dance. She thought about all the ways her life had changed, all the grief and growth and impossible second chances. She thought about the child they had lost and the foundation that carried their name. She thought about the dangerous world Daniel had navigated and the legitimate empire he had built. And she thought about love. Not the naive love of their first marriage, the love that could not survive tragedy, but the mature love they had built together, tested by time and circumstance, strong enough to face whatever came next. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if the years between had never happened. They kissed in the garden of their secret house, two people who had been broken by the same tragedy and found each other again on the other side. The wedding was held 3 months later, a small ceremony attended, only by family and closest friends. Emily's sister stood beside her as maid of honor, having finally been told the full truth and having accepted it with the practical pragmatism Emily had always loved about her. Karen served as Daniel's best woman, a choice that surprised no one who knew how much she had done to help them reach this point. They wrote their own vows, standing before the same altar where they had married the first time, speaking words that acknowledged the past, while embracing the future. "I promise to stay," Emily said, looking into Daniel's eyes. "Not because it is easy, but because it is worth it. I promise to see you, all of you, even the parts that live in shadows. And I promise to keep building hope for us and for everyone our story might touch." "I promise to protect," Daniel replied, "not by hiding you from my world, but by making that world worthy of you. I promise to keep transforming, to keep becoming better, to keep earning the love you have given me. And I promise to never run again, no matter how hard it gets." They exchanged rings, newly purchased bands that complemented the restored engagement ring, and when they kissed, the small crowd cheered for a love that had survived more than most people could imagine. The years that followed brought the ordinary challenges and joys that fill any life. The Hope Foundation grew into a national organization, with Emily eventually stepping back from daily operations to train the next generation of leaders. Daniel's legitimate empire thrived, creating jobs and contributing to communities across the country. They moved from the estate to the secret house, now no longer secret, wanting a home rather than a fortress. And one autumn morning, 5 years after their second wedding, Emily woke Daniel with news that changed everything once more. The pregnancy was closely monitored, both of them carrying fears that never fully faded. But week by week, month by month, the baby grew strong and healthy. When their daughter was born the following spring, she arrived screaming and perfect, and they named her Hope after the foundation that had given them purpose in their darkest time. "We made it," Emily whispered, holding their daughter in the quiet of the hospital room, while Daniel sat beside her, tears streaming down his face. "After everything, we made it." "You made it," Daniel replied. "You saved us, Emily. You saved me. Everything good in my life exists because you were brave enough to give me another chance." "No." Emily smiled, exhausted and radiant and more certain than she had ever been. "We saved each other. That is how it works when love is real. You save each other over and over again, until saving becomes simply living, until the two of you become one story, told across all the years you have left. They brought hope home to the house that had once been secret, that had become a sanctuary, that was now simply home. The nursery that Daniel had created years ago, preserved through everything, finally welcomed the child it had always been waiting for. And in the quiet moments of those early days, feeding and changing and marveling at the miracle of new life, Emily and Daniel finally understood what their journey had been building toward. Not power, not redemption, not even second chances, though they had needed all of those things along the way. Family. That was what they had been building. A family forged in loss, tempered by transformation, and finally made real by the courage to love again. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying I have watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already, because stories like this one, stories of impossible love and second chances and the courage to rebuild, are exactly what we create here. Like this video if it touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs to believe that broken things can be made whole again. Emily Carter Romano stands at the window of her home, watching her daughter play in the garden where fireflies dance on summer evenings. Her husband works in the study behind her, the empire he built now fully legitimate, his power used to create rather than destroy. The Hope Foundation helps thousands of families every year, turning grief into purpose, loss into meaning. Some stories begin with a wedding, others begin with a funeral. But this one began with both endings happening inside the same heart, and it emerged into something neither Emily nor Daniel could have imagined when they signed their divorce papers all those years ago. They lost a child, a marriage, and the people they used to be. And they found in the ruins of all that loss the foundations for something stronger. That is the secret, Emily thinks, as the evening light turns golden and her daughter's laughter carries through the open window. The secret is not that love conquers all. Love does not conquer anything by itself. The secret is that people can change, that grief can become growth, that the worst thing that ever happens to you can lead, through impossible paths, to the best things you never knew to hope for. Divorced after losing their child, she rebuilt her life, unaware her ex was now the Mafia Boss. That is how the story started. But it is not how the story ends. The story ends here, in a house full of love, with a family built on second chances, and a future bright enough to illuminate even the darkest memories of the past. The story ends with hope.